They found her clothes folded on the riverbank that morning. Just her clothes, nothing else. The village searched for 3 days, dragging nets through the water, calling her name until their voices broke. On the 4th day, they stopped looking. They always stopped on the 4th day. But Amara came back on the 7th. She walked into the village at dawn, soaking wet, her eyes holding something the rest of them had forgotten how to see. In her arms, wrapped in her own torn dress, she carried a child that wasn't there before. And when the elders asked her where she'd been, she said only one thing. "I made a promise to someone who had no one else." This is the story of what happened in those 7 days, and why, after Amara returned, the river never took another soul from that village again. My name is Amara K. And I need you to understand something before I tell you the rest. I wasn't special. I wasn't chosen by the ancestors or marked by destiny. I was just tired. Tired of watching my mother's hands shake as she counted coins that were never enough. Tired of seeing my younger brother's ribs through his shirt. Tired of being 26 years old and feeling like I'd already lived 70 years of disappointment. The river was supposed to be our lifeline. That's what my grandmother used to say. She'd take me there when I was small, before the drought years, before the fish stopped coming, before the water started smelling like rust and something darker. She'd say the river remembered everything, every tear, every prayer, every life it ever touched. I stopped believing that the day we buried her. It was a Tuesday when everything changed. I remember because Tuesdays were market days, and I'd been up since 4 in the morning, helping my mother prepare the small vegetables we'd managed to grow. Okra, a handful of tomatoes. Not enough to make real money, but enough to buy rice for the week if we were careful. The sun hadn't fully risen when I decided to walk to the river first. I told myself I just wanted to wash my face, clear my head before the noise of the market. But the truth was simpler and sadder than that. I wanted to be alone. I wanted 5 minutes where no one needed anything from me. The path to the river wound through acacia trees that had somehow survived the dry seasons. Their shadows stretched long and thin across the red dirt, and my feet knew every root, every stone. I'd walked this path 1,000 times, maybe more. It was the one constant thing in a life that seemed to shift and crack beneath me like dried mud. Before we continue this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. Because what happened next, what I'm about to tell you, changed not just my life, but the lives of everyone in my village. The river that morning was different. I can't explain exactly how, but you know that feeling when you walk into a room and sense that something happened there, even though you can't see what it was? That's what the air felt like, heavy, waiting. I knelt at the water's edge, where the bank sloped down to meet the current. The water was lower than it had been in months, exposing rocks that usually stayed hidden. I cupped my hands, ready to splash my face when I heard it, a sound like breathing, but not human breathing, slower, deeper, like the earth itself was exhaling. I should have left. Every instinct in my body told me to stand up, walk away, go to the market like I'd planned. But I didn't. Instead, I followed the sound. 30 feet downstream, where the river curved and created a small pool separated from the main current, I saw her. At first, I thought it was a woman who'd fallen in. Her upper body was caught between 2 rocks, her head barely above water. Dark hair spread around her like spilled ink. But as I got closer, stumbling over the uneven stones, my mind struggled to make sense of what I was seeing. Her skin had a strange quality to it, not quite human. It caught the early light in a way that reminded me of fish scales, but softer, more like mother of pearl. And below the water, where her legs should have been, I saw movement, a tail, silver green and powerful, trapped between the rocks. I froze. Every folktale my grandmother ever told me came rushing back. The water spirits, the beings that lived between worlds, the stories we were supposed to remember but not believe too literally. But this wasn't a story. This was a living being, and she was dying. Her eyes opened. They were completely black, no whites at all, like looking into deep water at night. And in those eyes, I saw something I recognized. I saw fear. I saw pain. I saw the same exhaustion I felt every morning when I woke up. She didn't speak, but her hand moved, just slightly, reaching toward me. I don't know what made me move. Maybe it was because I'd spent so much of my life feeling helpless, and here was one moment where I could actually do something. Maybe it was because she looked at me the way I'd looked at my reflection that morning, like someone who was barely holding on. I waded into the water. It was colder than I expected, and the current pulled at my dress, but I pushed forward until I reached her. Up close, I could see she was bleeding. Not red blood, but something clearer, almost luminescent. It seeped from where the rocks had torn her tail. "I'm going to help you," I said, even though I had no idea if she could understand me. "Just hold on." I tried to move the rocks, but they were too heavy, wedged too tightly. My hands slipped. My shoulders burned. I could feel her watching me, her breathing getting shallower. Then I remembered the leverage technique my brother had shown me once when we were trying to move a fallen tree. I found a thick branch on the bank, wedged it under the largest rock, and pushed with everything I had. The rock shifted, then rolled. The water rushed into the space it left, and suddenly she was free. She didn't swim away. That's what surprised me most. Instead, she gripped my arm. Her fingers were cold, stronger than they looked. She pulled herself closer to the bank, into the shallow water where the pool was calmer, and that's when I saw it clearly. She was pregnant, very pregnant. Her belly was swollen beneath the water, and one hand kept moving to cradle it protectively. "Oh," I breathed. It was all I could say. She looked at me, and I swear I saw tears mixing with the river water on her face. Then she did something I'll never forget. She took my hand and placed it on her belly. Beneath my palm, I felt movement. A kick, strong and insistent, like any baby fighting to be born. In that moment, every difference between us disappeared. She wasn't a mermaid. I wasn't human. We were just two women, and one of us was in trouble. I stayed with her in that pool for hours. The sun climbed higher. The market day came and went. I knew my mother would be worried, then angry, then scared, but I couldn't leave. The mermaid, I'd started thinking of her as Zara in my head, though I had no idea what her real name was in labor. I'd helped deliver 2 babies in my village before, assisted the midwives when they needed extra hands. But this was different. The contractions came in waves that made the water around us ripple and surge. She gripped my hands so hard I thought my bones would break. But I didn't let go. Between contractions, she would rest her head against the rocks, exhausted, and I would pour water over her tail, keeping it wet, trying to remember everything I'd ever learned about helping someone through pain. "You're strong," I told her, over and over. "You can do this. Your baby is coming, and you're strong enough to bring them into the world." I don't know if she understood my words, but she seemed to understand my voice, the tone of it, the intention behind it. As the afternoon shadows grew longer, I started to worry. The labor was taking too long. Something was wrong. I could see it in the way she moved, the sounds she made. They weren't the sounds of normal pain. They were sounds of desperation. I made a decision then that still haunts me. I waded deeper into the pool, behind her, and I helped the way the midwives had taught me, with my hands, with pressure, with steady, certain movements, even though my heart was racing with fear. "Push," I said. "Now. Push with everything you have." She did. The water churned, my arms ached, and then, suddenly, there was a baby in my hands. Not a human baby, not a mermaid baby, something in between. They had her mother's pearl-like skin, but tiny legs instead of a tail. Perfect fingers that gripped at the air, and lungs that knew immediately how to breathe. The baby cried, a high, clear sound that echoed across the river. And Zara, the mother, made a sound too. Not a cry, something deeper. A song maybe, in a language I'd never heard. I lifted the baby out of the water and held them against my chest, wrapping them in the dry part of my dress. They were so small, so impossibly fragile. Their eyes, when they opened, were the same deep black as their mother's, but lighter somehow, like they held both sky and water. Zara reached for her child. I should have given them to her immediately. Of course I should have. But something made me hesitate. The baby's legs, the way they were breathing air, the way they'd cried. I looked at Zara and I saw understanding in her eyes. She knew. She knew what I was thinking before I'd fully formed the thought myself. This baby couldn't live in the water. Not entirely. They needed both worlds, or neither world would be right. Zara pulled herself fully onto the bank then, her tail scraping against the rocks. In the fading light, I watched as something impossible happened. The scales began to shimmer and shift, and where her tail had been, legs began to form. Human legs, weak and trembling, like they'd never been used before. She was transforming, for her baby. Giving up her true form to stay close to the child who couldn't follow her into the deep water. But the transformation was costing her. I could see it in the way her breathing became labored, the way her skin lost some of its luminescence. She was burning through some essential energy, some core part of herself, and it was killing her. "Stop," I said, gripping her shoulder. "You're hurting yourself. Stop." She looked at me, and I heard her voice for the first time. Not in my ears, but in my head, clear as crystal. "The child needs care, a mother from each world." "I don't understand," I said aloud. She placed her hand over mine, the one still holding her baby. Her voice came again, weaker this time. 7 days. I need 7 days to heal, to learn this body. Keep my child safe for 7 days. Then I will come for them. I promise. How am I supposed to explain a baby to my village, to my mother? Tell them the truth, that you made a promise to someone who had no one else. And then she was gone. She slipped back into the water, her partial transformation reversing, her tail reforming. She looked at me once more, at her baby in my arms, and then she dove deep, disappearing beneath the surface. I stood there, alone on the riverbank, holding a newborn that wasn't mine. The sun was setting. Market day was over. And I had absolutely no idea how I was going to explain this to anyone. The walk back to the village felt like walking through a dream. Or a nightmare. I couldn't tell which. The baby stayed quiet, nestled against my chest, their tiny fingers gripping my dress. Every few minutes, I would look down at them, half expecting them to have vanished, to discover I'd imagined everything. But they were real, solid and warm and very, very real. My mother saw me first. She was standing outside our small house, arms crossed, worry etched so deeply into her face, it looked like it hurt. When she saw me, relief and anger fought for control of her expression. "Amara, where have you been? I've been worried sick. The whole village has been looking." She stopped. Her eyes dropped to the bundle in my arms. "What is that?" "A baby." "I can see it's a baby." "Whose baby?" I took a breath, remembered Zara's words. Tell them the truth. I made a promise to someone who had no one else. My mother's face went through several emotions in quick succession. Confusion, disbelief, concern, then, surprisingly, softening. "Let me see," she said quietly. I unwrapped the baby enough for her to see the small face, the dark eyes that were open and alert, watching everything with an intensity that seemed impossible for someone so new to the world. My mother didn't speak for a long moment. She just looked at the child, and I watched something change in her expression. Something I hadn't seen in years. Wonder. "This child isn't human," she said finally. "Not an accusation, just a statement of fact." "No, not entirely. But they're not entirely spirit either." "No." She reached out and touched the baby's cheek with one finger. The baby turned toward the touch instinctively, their mouth opening slightly. "They're hungry," my mother said. Come inside. We need to figure out how to feed them. It was that simple. No interrogation, no demands for a fuller explanation. Just the practical matter of caring for an infant who needed care. That was my mother. She might count coins until her hands shook, but she'd never turned away anything that needed help. The next 7 days were the strangest of my life. News spread through the village faster than wind through dry grass. The girl who disappeared to the river came back with a baby. A strange baby. A baby with skin that sometimes seemed to shimmer in certain light. A baby who barely cried but made soft sounds like water over stones. People had opinions. Of course they did. The village elder, a man named Kofi, who'd seen 70 rainy seasons, came to our house on the second day. "This is unnatural," he said, not unkindly. "What do you expect to happen when the mother comes back?" "I expect to keep my promise," I said. "I told her I'd keep the baby safe for 7 days. That's what I'm going to do." "And then?" "Then I'll figure out what comes next." Kofi studied me for a long moment. Then he did something unexpected. He smiled. "Your grandmother would be proud. She always said you had her stubbornness." He left after that, but not before placing a small bundle of dried fish on our table. A gift, a sign of approval, or at least acceptance. Others were less kind. A woman named Patience, who'd never liked my family much, stood in the village center on the third day and proclaimed loudly that I'd brought a curse into the village, that the baby would steal the river's blessings, that I should take it back where it came from. I ignored her. I had more important things to worry about. Like the fact that the baby, who I'd started calling Kai in my mind, seemed to need more than milk. They needed water. Lots of water. I had to keep their skin damp, or they'd become fretful and uncomfortable. My mother fashioned a small basin we could keep filled, and I'd lay Kai in it several times a day, letting them splash and kick their small legs. They seemed happiest in the water, most themselves. And watching them, I started to understand the impossible situation Zara had found herself in. How do you raise a child who belongs to 2 worlds when you can only give them access to one? On the 5th day, my younger brother, Kofi, named after the elder, came to me with questions I wasn't prepared to answer. "Is it true the baby's mother is a mermaid?" I hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." "And she's coming back?" "She said 7 days. She promised." Kofi was quiet for a moment, sitting beside me on the floor near the basin where Kai was gently floating, held by my hands. Then he said something I didn't expect. "I hope she comes back. Not because of the baby, though I understand that, but because if mermaids are real, if spirits and water beings are real, then maybe other things are real too. Maybe hope is real. Maybe things can get better." His words hit me harder than they should have, because he was right. This whole village had been living without hope for so long, without anything to believe in except the hard dirt under our feet and the coins that never stretched far enough. Maybe that's what Zara's baby represented. Not a curse, but possibility. On the 6th day, I took Kai back to the river. I don't know what made me do it. Instinct, maybe. Or the way Kai had been restless all morning, making soft sounds that reminded me of calling. Looking for something. Someone. I walked to the same spot where I'd found Zara. The water was calmer now, the pool peaceful in the late afternoon light. I sat at the edge and unwrapped Kai, letting their legs touch the water. The reaction was immediate. Kai's whole body relaxed, their small face breaking into what I swear was a smile. And then I saw movement in the water. Not the mother. Something else. Smaller shapes, darting through the current. Fish, maybe, but moving with too much purpose to be ordinary fish. They circled beneath where Kai's feet touched the water. Dancing, almost. And I realized they were protecting the child. Or celebrating them. Or both. I stayed there until the sun began to set. Just me and Kai and the river, and whatever else lived in those depths. And for the first time since my grandmother died, I felt like maybe she'd been right. Maybe the river did remember. Maybe it still cared. When I walked back to the village, I felt different, stronger somehow, more certain of what I was doing and why it mattered. Tomorrow would be the 7th day. Tomorrow, Zara would come back, just like she'd promised. I had to believe that, because if she didn't, I had no idea what would happen next. But that night, as I lay with Kai sleeping peacefully in the basin beside my mat, I made a decision, even if Zara came back. Even if she took her child and returned to the water world where she belonged, I wouldn't forget this. I wouldn't forget what it felt like to care for something that needed me, to keep a promise even when it was hard, to believe in something beyond the daily grind of survival. My mother came to sit beside me in the darkness. She didn't say anything, just reached over and took my hand. "You've changed," she said finally. "In these 7 days, you seem taller somehow." "I don't feel taller. I feel terrified." "That's how you know you're doing something that matters. Fear and purpose feel the same sometimes." We sat together in the quiet, listening to Kai's soft breathing, to the distant sound of the river flowing in the darkness. And I thought about tomorrow. The 7th day arrived with clouds heavy enough to promise rain. The first rain in months. The whole village felt it, that electric tension in the air before a storm. People moved faster, gathering things from outside, preparing for water that might actually fall from the sky instead of being rationed from the well. I took Kai to the river at dawn, before anyone else was awake. I knew Zara would come early. I could feel it in the same way I'd felt that something was different on the morning I found her. The river was higher than it had been in weeks. The promised rain must have fallen upstream. The current moved with new strength, pulling at the banks, reshaping the landscape it touched. I stood at the water's edge, holding Kai close. They were awake, alert, those dark eyes watching the surface of the water with recognition. She appeared as the first rays of sun broke through the clouds. One moment the water was empty, the next she was there, her head breaking the surface, her dark hair slicked back, her pearl skin catching the early light. Zara had changed. She looked stronger, more solid somehow. And as she pulled herself onto the bank, I saw that her legs, while still new and unsteady, were real legs now. Permanent legs. She'd completed the transformation. She'd given up the water world entirely for her child. "You came back," I said, though of course she had. She'd promised. She nodded, her eyes locked on Kai. Then, she spoke aloud for the first time, not in my head. Her voice was rough, like she was still learning how to shape words with a human throat. "You kept your promise." "Of course I did." She reached for Kai, and I handed the baby over. The reunion was quiet but intense. Zara held her child close, breathing in their scent, touching their face with trembling fingers. Kai, for their part, seemed to recognize their mother immediately, making soft sounds and gripping her finger. "I learned," Zara said after a long moment. "Learn to walk. Learn to breathe fully this air. Learn to be what my child needs." She looked at me. "But I have nowhere to go. No village will accept me. No people will claim me." I understood what she was asking before she finished speaking, and I understood that my decision in this moment would change everything, for me, for my family, for my village. "You'll stay with us," I said. "Both of you. We have room. It's not much, but we have room." "Your people?" "Will learn," I interrupted. "The same way they've learned everything else, one day at a time." Zara's eyes filled with tears. Human tears. I realized. She was crying the way I cried, the way any mother cried when someone offered her a lifeline. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this?" It was a fair question, and the answer was complicated. It was about my grandmother and the river and the stories I'd grown up hearing. It was about my brother wanting to believe hope was real. It was about my mother's hands shaking while counting coins and still having room in her heart for one more mouth to feed. But mostly, it was simpler than all of that. "Because you needed someone," I said, "and I needed to be someone who kept their promises." Walking back to the village with Zara and Kai was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Every step felt heavy with possibility and consequence. I knew there would be fear, resistance. People like Patience who would see this as confirmation of every dark thing they wanted to believe. But I also knew there would be people like Kofi the Elder, like my mother, like my brother, people who were tired of living small, frightened lives and were ready for something different, even if that something was strange and challenging. My mother was waiting outside our house. She saw us coming, saw the woman with the shimmer skin walking beside me, holding the baby. Her face went through a dozen emotions in the span of a heartbeat. Then she did what she always did. She solved the practical problem first. "You'll need clothes," she said to Zara. "And food. Come inside. We'll figure the rest out later." That became the pattern. My mother's pragmatism repeated across the village in 100 small ways. The woman who ran the market stall started saving extra vegetables for us. Kofi the Elder's wife brought a dress she said didn't fit her anymore, though I suspected it fit just fine. My brother started teaching Zara words, helping her learn our language with the same patience he'd shown teaching me to read years ago. Not everyone accepted it. Patience kept her distance and her judgments. A few other families did the same. But slowly, grudgingly, most of the village made space for this strange new family. The girl from the river, the woman from the water, and the baby who belonged to both worlds. 3 months after that 7th day, something remarkable happened. It rained, really rained, not just a drizzle, but a deep, soaking rain that lasted for 2 full days. The kind of rain that seeps into the earth and replenishes everything it touches. The river swelled. The crops we'd planted, more in hope than expectation, began to grow. The fish returned, not in huge numbers, but enough. Enough to feed families. Enough to sell at the market. Enough to remind us that scarcity wasn't permanent. People started to whisper that it was Zara, that she'd brought the blessing of the water spirits, that her presence in our village had healed something broken between us and the river. Maybe they were right, or maybe the drought had just run its course, and rain always comes eventually if you wait long enough. I didn't know, still don't. What I did know was that Zara, who'd been learning and adapting with fierce determination, started to smile more. Started to look less like someone in exile and more like someone who'd found home. And Kai grew, strong and healthy, and increasingly curious about everything. They had their mother's eyes and what I swore was her courage. But they also had something else. A lightness. A joy that came from being loved completely by everyone around them. On the day Kai took their first steps, half the village came to watch. Not because they had to, but because somewhere along the way, this child had become ours. Not just Zara's or mine, but the village's. A symbol of what was possible when you chose kindness over fear. I'm 30 years old now. 4 years have passed since that morning at the river. 4 years since I made a promise to someone who had no one else. My life is still hard in many ways. Money is still tight. Work is still exhausting. My mother's hands still shake sometimes when she counts what we have. But everything is different too. Because I'm different. Because I learned something in those 7 days that changed how I see the world. I learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is show up. Keep a promise. Care for something that needs caring, even when it's inconvenient. Even when it's scary. Even when you have no idea what you're doing. Zara runs the village's water committee now. Turns out that someone who spent their whole life in the river has strong opinions about water conservation and irrigation. Her suggestions have increased our crop yields by 40%. She still struggles with certain phrases in our language, and her skin still sometimes catches the light in ways that remind everyone she's not quite human in the traditional sense. But she's one of us now, completely. Kai is learning to swim, not just surface swimming, but deep swimming. Zara takes them to the river every morning, and I watch as they dive beneath the surface and stay under for minutes at a time. They're discovering their other heritage, their connection to the water world they'll never fully belong to, but will always be part of. And me? I became the village teacher. It wasn't planned, it just happened. Parents started bringing their children to me, asking me to teach them the way I'd taught Kai. With patience, with attention, with the belief that every person has something valuable to offer if you give them space to grow. Last week, something happened that brought everything full circle. A young man from the neighboring village came to see me. He was nervous, wringing his hands, looking at the ground. "My sister," he said. "She's been gone for 3 days. We found her clothes by the river." My heart stopped. I knew that story. I'd lived that story. "Has anyone gone into the water?" I asked. "Actually gone in, not just looked from the bank?" He shook his head. "Everyone's too afraid. They say the river takes people, that you don't go in after them." I looked at Zara, who was sitting nearby with Kai. She met my eyes and nodded slightly. "Take me to the river," I said. "Now." We found her caught in the reeds downstream. Not a mermaid, just a human woman who'd gotten tangled and trapped. But she was alive. Barely, but alive. And as I pulled her free, as I felt her grip my arm the way Zara had gripped my arm 4 years ago, I understood something profound. The river hadn't been taking people. The river had been waiting for someone brave enough to go into the water instead of just staring at it from the safety of the shore. Waiting for someone to choose action over fear. Waiting for someone to keep a promise, even when keeping it was hard. I'm telling you this story now because I want you to understand something. Magic is real. Not the kind in children's tales, all sparkles and easy answers. Real magic. The magic of showing up, of keeping your word, of choosing compassion when fear would be easier. Zara didn't give me treasure. She didn't grant me wishes. She didn't transform my life with supernatural gifts. What she gave me was much more valuable than that. She gave me purpose. She taught me that the most extraordinary thing any of us can do is be there for someone when they need us. To see someone drowning, literally or figuratively, and choose to wade into the water. That's the gift that changed my village. Not water spirits or ancient blessings, though maybe those played their part. The real transformation came from a simple choice, repeated by dozens of people over months and years. The choice to care, to include, to make room for something different and challenging and ultimately beautiful. Before I let you go, I want to ask you something. Think about your own life. Have you ever walked past something that needed help because it was easier to keep walking? Have you ever ignored a promise because keeping it would be inconvenient? Have you ever chosen fear of what might happen over the possibility of what could happen? I'm not judging. I did all of those things before that morning at the river. I'd become so good at survival that I'd forgotten about living. But here's what I learned. Sometimes the river chooses you. Sometimes life presents you with a moment that demands more than you think you have to give. And in those moments, you have a choice. You can walk away, protect yourself, play it safe. Or you can wade into the water and see what happens when you actually keep your promises. I chose to wade in. And yes, my clothes got wet. Yes, I was terrified. Yes, I had no idea what would happen. But I also discovered that I was stronger than I thought. That my heart was bigger than I'd given it credit for. That my village was full of people who were just waiting for permission to be their best selves. So I'm telling you this story not just to share what happened to me, but to ask you to think about what's happening in your own life. What's the river that's calling you? What promise are you afraid to keep? What person or situation needs you to wade into the water instead of standing safely on the shore? Leave a comment and let me know. Tell me what this story made you think about. Tell me what you're facing in your own life. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that showing up matters, that promises matter, that small acts of compassion can change everything. And subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because this is what we do here. We tell stories about ordinary people who choose to be extraordinary, about the moments that define us, about the promises that transform not just our lives, but the lives of everyone around us. Kai is calling me. It's time for their afternoon swim. Zara is waiting at the door, that patient smile on her face that I've come to love. My mother is cooking, the smell of her stew filling our small house. My brother is teaching the neighbor's children to read on the porch. This is my life now. Not perfect, not easy, but mine. built on a promise I kept when every reasonable part of me said I should walk away. The river is still flowing. The rain still comes when it's ready. The village still struggles with things that have nothing to do with magic or mermaids. But we're different now. We know that we're capable of more than we thought, that we can make room for the impossible, that we can choose love over fear. That's the lesson I learned in those 7 days. That's what I want to share with you. That's why I'm telling this story. Because somewhere in your life, right now, there's a moment waiting, a choice that will define you, a promise that's asking to be kept, an opportunity to wade into the water. And I'm here to tell you that it's worth it. The fear, the uncertainty, the risk, it's all worth it. Because on the other side of that choice, you might just find the person you were always meant to be. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. And remember, the next time you walk past the river, the next time you see someone who needs help, the next time life asks you to be brave, think about a girl who found a drowning mermaid and discovered that sometimes the best thing you can do is simply keep your promise. No matter what it costs, no matter how scared you are, no matter what anyone else says, just keep your promise. Wade into the water, see what happens. You might be surprised at who you become.